I'm now going to be speaking with Fabrizio Hochschild. He is the special advisor on the preparations for the commemoration of the United Nations 75th anniversary. In his current role as Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor to the Secretary General, Mr. Hochschild is coordinating the preparation for the commemoration of the 75th anniversary and all related celebrations through a system-wide process of consultations and reflections on the role of the United Nations in advancing international cooperation and in supporting member states' ability to respond to emerging challenges and frontier issues. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you, sir.
Great. Well, so I think we'll be starting the interview. Here we go. Good luck, dear.
Almost there. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Fabrizio. So good to have you.
It's great to be here with you, and I have to start by thanking the amazing Peace One Day team and all the fantastic artists, performers, and media personalities and civil society actors and voices that they brought together. It's really an incredible effort, and it shows that the vision of the United Nations, the vision of peace, is still alive and well and kicking, and please keep kicking.
Thank you. Before we begin, I know you have a short film for everyone to watch about the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Shall we take a look at it?
Our world is facing unprecedented challenges. For the United Nations 75th anniversary, we set out to ask the world, what are your hopes for your future? The United Nations listened, and the world spoke. The world is not as divided as we thought.
Wonderful. So we get started. We'll jump right into it. Okay, wonderful. For the benefit of our viewers, Mr. Fabrizio, can you please tell us what the current responsibilities of the USG are?
In my current job, I'm leading the effort the Secretary General wanted undertaken for our 75th birthday. And even before COVID set upon us, it was clear that the UN that the world was not heading in a very good direction. There was a multiplication of global challenges like climate change, like protracted conflict, like the disruption caused by new technologies, and yet a deficit in international cooperation. So with that imbalance between international challenges and international solutions, the Secretary General wanted to use the 75th anniversary to reach out to the world and hear from them how they'd like us to proceed, what they saw as the priorities for the future, what their biggest fears were, and what they saw as the role of international cooperation, the UN in particular, in overcoming those. So I've been leading this effort to get a global conversation going and to collect the results. And I have a small and very gifted team, and we've reached well over 1 million people in all 193 countries. We've had thousands of dialogues, and we've collected the largest amounts of results ever collected around global priorities, global fears, and in particular also around post-COVID recovery priorities. So that's what I've been doing.
Fantastic. I've contributed to that as well, and I think it's quite amazing that everyone can participate in this conversation and make a difference and seek the difference that they want. Can you tell us a little about your personal journey? Where did you start from, and how did you get to the United Nations up to this day?
Well,
it's a question.
I grew up, I could spend too long, take up too much time, so I'll try to make it brief. But I grew up, I'm half Chilean, half British. I grew up in many different countries for different reasons. And then I started with a small British non-governmental organization, the Quakers, in fact, their development arm, which was called Quaker Peace and Service. I started as a volunteer for them in Darfur at a time when nobody knew where Darfur was, barely anybody knew where Sudan was. I started in Darfur as a volunteer working in rural development projects. I have a degree in forestry. And I was recruited there by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees to work on rural development projects to help make Chadian refugees at that time who had fled Hussein Habre, who since has been convicted as a war criminal in Chad, to help make them self-sustaining through agriculture. I then went to work for UNHCR in the South Sudan, where there was a war going on, and quickly started working in conflict-related areas for the UN. I've worked on every single continent in conflict and post-conflict areas. I've worked in peacekeeping, I've worked in human rights, but most of my career has been in humanitarian. Before taking up this post in New York, I was in the Central African Republic, and this new Secretary General, or then new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, brought me to headquarters to work with him in strategic planning and policy setting. And so I've been in New York for the past 3.5 years. But basically, I'm a seasoned UN international civil servant who's worked in an unusually high number of different parts of the UN and in different geographic settings. And I consider myself hugely privileged to be able to serve the people whom this organization works for.
That's absolutely amazing. Your experience is vast and it's on the ground, and you truly are a global citizen. And I can't wait to meet you. We would have met in person this year, but circumstances haven't allowed us. But soon, I hope. What for you are the most important accomplishments of the United Nations?
I think much of what the UN has achieved is allowing us to take so many things for granted in most of the world. The fact that we grew up in peace. The world has experienced, despite many awful conflicts, on the whole, there has been no such peaceful era in human history as the 75 years since the UN was founded. There has been no period in history with such a long absence of an armed superpower, major power confrontation. That was the biggest fear of those who founded the UN. If you look at our UN Charter, the biggest fear was that there would be a repeat of what they twice in their lifetimes had lived through, the bloodiest conflicts of all time. That was averted. Their biggest fear was that there would be nuclear Armageddon. That was averted. Also, there's been no period in human history with such progress in terms of development, with such progress in reducing illiteracy, in improving access to education, access to health. In the 75 years that the UN has existed, the average length people live to has jumped by about 27 years. That's an incredible achievement. In the period the UN has existed, poverty rates have gone from about 50% of human beings living in extreme poverty to about 10 or 12%. So these achievements are unprecedented in human history. And of course, much has to do with the work of government, with the work of civil society, with the work of inventors and business. But I think the UN has provided a framework for that. The UN has provided a framework to resolve disputes, and the UN has taken the best of those developments and helped exchange practice. So it would be extremely arrogant to attribute all those successes to the UN alone, but the UN has certainly provided the framework for boosting that progress. So who today has heard of smallpox? The very fact that very few people even know what it is a huge achievement of the UN. And I think the UN, for all its failings, the basic achievement is that we can take so much of progress for granted that those who came before us, the generation pre-1945, had to struggle with. The big question, though, now is where we're headed. And that progress that we've seen in most parts of the world for 75 years, whether it will continue in light of new threats. And there are many, many big question marks around that. Hence the urgency of renewing our commitment to international cooperation and renewing international cooperation so it functions much better.
What is the role do you feel Peace Day plays in peace building?
The role who plays, sorry?
Peace Day plays in peace building.
I think Peace Day is a tremendous opportunity for inspiration. You know, the world, when the UN came together, the world very much functioned in a rather top-down way. The UN itself was the brainchild of the four leaders of the Allied nations who met at the end of 1941, at the beginning of 1942, in Washington. It was four men in a room who basically set the UN in motion. Today, it's not four men in the room anymore by which the world progresses. It's much more about civil society engagement. It's much more about a broad variety of influences like those you've involved who shake and move the world. And I think Peace One Day is a huge example of that. We cannot give up on peace. It has to be fought for, and it has to be fought for every step of the way. There's a danger that we grow numb. We grow numb to the unbearable suffering that still goes on in Syria 8 years after the conflict started. We grow numb to the suffering in Yemen, in Central African Republic, and elsewhere. And Peace One Day keeps that flame alive and drives forward and introduces accountability for leaders everywhere, and including in the UN, to keep driving the agenda forward. So I think in raising awareness and in keeping us moving in the right direction, initiatives such as Peace One Day are absolutely essential.
And I truly hope we can achieve global ceasefire, as the Secretary General has been asking for. We have to wrap this up. We just have just less than a minute, but I really wanted to wind this up with one last question. What do you think is the future of the United Nations as we look forward to another 75 years? This has been a difficult time, and we're all trying to build back better as we emerge from this crisis. What do you think is going to be the future?
Well, I think in a terribly painful and tragic way, this crisis has shown us that international cooperation is more essential than ever. But if international cooperation is going through a hard time, it's also because some people have lost faith. So we also need to reinvent ourselves. And above all, we need to bring in more voices of civil society, more voices of business, and above all, more voices of youth. So we hope you'll also help us renew ourselves in order to serve future generations better.
Absolutely. With you all the way. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. I really look forward to meeting you someday. Thank you.